Welcome to the Metabolic Link, a podcast that explores the common thread of metabolism in health and disease. This is where science meets society. Welcome to today's episode of the Metabolic Link. I'm your host, Dr. Dominic D'Agostino, research scientist and faculty at USF Medical School with a background in nutrition, neuroscience, and pharmacology. My guest today is Dr. Spencer Nadolsky. He is a board-certified obesity and lipid specialist. He's a physician and an NCAA heavyweight wrestler. His current focus is on delivering healthcare through innovative ways with his current program, Vineyard. And for more information, join vineyard.com. He has helped thousands of patients through his online practice, along with many more, hundreds of thousands through his social media information that he puts out there. Dr. Nadolsky has a very large social media following. He speaks around the world about obesity, about lipids, and how healthcare can be delivered. As a follow-up to this podcast episode on April 22nd, Pacific, 9 a.m. Pacific time and 12 Eastern time, Dr. Nadolsky will be joining us for a live Q&A on the Metabolic Initiative platform to answer all your questions in an hour-long session. To sign up for this free, please visit membership.metabolicinitiative.com/Dr. Spencer. So your first 7 days of this will be free, and then you'll gain access to really hundreds of different metabolic health presentations about different metabolic therapies. You're going to have world expert presentations from the Metabolic Health Conference, Metabolic Health Summit that we host. There's ebooks, there's private podcast episodes that are only on this platform, and more. So thank you all for joining in, and I really hope you enjoyed this episode. Dr. Spencer Nadolsky, thank you so much for being on the Metabolic Link podcast. It's great to connect. So I think we connected a long time ago. Maybe it had to be like 8 years because it was in the gym. I haven't been in like 8 years.
I was hanging out with Lane Norton. He was like, "Hey, there's Dom." I was like, "Oh wow, small world."
Yeah, that's awesome. So you are a doc that lifts, and that's actually the name of your podcast. And
That's right.
medical students that I teach actually follow your podcast. Are big fans
Good.
of your work
Good.
and the information, the educational outreach information you put out there, which is really, there's a major focus on exercise and nutrition as medicine. And maybe we'll brush on that a little bit. But, you know, in addition, you are really the most knowledgeable person that I've come across that I know of that really knows the science and the clinical application of the GLP-1 drugs. So I would like to take a deep dive into that.
Perfect.
I think these are like the drugs of the decade, maybe century. And would love to just, but before we begin, maybe give the listeners a little bit of a background on how you got into this track.
Yeah, first, I mean, we coordinated our shirts, so we're definitely twinsies today. So I got into this. My dad was a biology teacher, mom was an elementary teacher, really big into sports and academics at a young age. Did really well in sports in school, did really well in academics, actually went to try to do football and wrestling at Division I at Michigan State and then UNC Chapel Hill. Realized I probably wasn't Bo Jackson and it was rough trying to do two major sports at once. I ended up choosing wrestling, but I used nutrition and exercise science to get good at what I did. And afterwards, I went to med school and everybody's like, "Oh, you're going to be a sports med doc and you're going to help athletes be bigger and stronger and faster." And I was like, "Yeah, I kind of like, I want to take a fraction of my obsession for nutrition and exercise and apply it to chronic disease." That was essentially it. I can't explain it. People would ask me like, that make you like, why would you do that? I'm like, I don't know. It was the thought of taking somebody from being sedentary and just standard American diet, a lot of highly processed, high calorie foods, and taking them to more of a better dietary pattern of some sort, and starting to exercise and taking them from nothing to just something, and watching their quality of life improve vastly from a few incremental steps away from where they currently were. And as opposed to taking somebody from, like me, I was into, benching however much weight. I increase your bench press by whatever, 20%, whatever it is. It didn't really it didn't really get me going. So I was really excited about getting just people that fraction of my obsession. And so through the years, back in 2007 I started med school, graduated in 2011. Residency is 3 years long, so graduated in 2014. At the time I started med school, that's right when these drugs started coming out. So exenatide, which was Byetta, was just approved right when I was in med school. And so we learned about them. It was kind of interesting, but right, that's right when I started training, is kind of understanding these meds. And at the time, the only weight loss medicines that were really pushed was like phentermine. And if
Yeah.
anybody knows what phentermine is, it was half of the fen-phen. So fen-phen was phentermine, and fenfluramine, which got a really bad rap due to the fenfluramine component, causes some valvulopathy issues,
Right.
floppy heart valves.
Yeah.
But the phentermine seemed to be okay, but it works. It's a sympathomimetic, works like noradrenaline in the brain for reducing appetite. But you get some of those kind of amphetamine-like
How
properties
does
from it.
that compare to like ephedrine
Yes.
hydrochloride? So I disclosed that, when I was back in college, like ephedrine was over the counter.
Yeah.
And that was like the go-to like pre-workout ephedrine,
Yeah.
caffeine, sometimes aspirin. But yeah, I was kind of a
Yeah.
fan
Kind of.
back in the day, 1990.
Yeah. Adrenergic like drugs
Mhm.
is kind of a similar concept
Yeah.
of how it works. And I don't think they've ever done any head to head, but the phentermine component, it's supposed to be relatively safe, but people get that increased heart rate, some insomnia from it, dry mouth, those types of things from it. And, overall, it's not a terrible drug, but when you think about diet and exercise, now I say this on average because people get so mad at me, it's around 5-6% total body weight loss over the course of a year on average. Of course, there's going to be people listening going, I lost half of my weight doing XYZ diet and exercise plan. But like when you look at the randomized trials, it's like 5-6%. Phentermine, at least on when they combined it with topiramate in a drug called Qsymia, is what got approved in like 2011 or 2012. That at the highest dose is 10 to 11% total body weight loss. So a little bit, better than diet and exercise in average. But that was like the best thing that they had. So fast forward to these, GLP-1 medicines. Byetta had a little bit of a weight loss, very small weight loss effect, but it was there. It was there. You had to inject it twice a day. Had a little bit of the glycemic benefit. Liraglutide, we were talking about earlier,
Yeah.
Victoza was first approved for type 2 diabetes, but we saw a little bit more weight loss with that one. It was a once a day injection. It wasn't until 2014, though, when
And
they,
that's still around though, liraglutide. It was
yeah,
NN2211. Yeah, my course director researched that in the 1990s and told me about it. So these drugs have been around for quite
They've
some time.
they've been around. So what they did though with the diabetes version of Victoza, they cranked up the dose from 1.8 milligrams to 3 milligrams. And so when they called it Saxenda in 2014, this was approved. But it was still only around like a 7, maybe 8% total body weight loss. Not that great. It's not that much better than diet and exercise on average and it was expensive. And you had to inject it once a day, nausea, vomiting, all those types of things. Not greatly tolerated. So at that time, it was kind of like, all right, we got this like super expensive, novel kind of drug, but it's not that effective. Like, why would we prescribe this that much? I'd still prescribe it once in a while if the insurance would cover it, but like, it didn't really work that well. 20, uh, 2016 or 17, Ozempic comes out, semaglutide. So semaglutide is the younger, stronger, more powerful brother of liraglutide, and the half life is like a week as opposed to whatever it is, a day or so for liraglutide. With that one, you were starting to see similar amounts of weight loss to the liraglutide at that lower dose. So Ozempic only went up to 1 milligram. But in 2021, they had been doing these studies, the STEP trials. If anybody remembers this, the STEP 1 trial came out and showed with high doses of semaglutide, now 2.4 milligrams as opposed to Ozempic at the time was 1 milligram. Now we're getting around 15% total body weight loss. And so when you compare that, all of a sudden you go from that 5 or 6% with, diet and exercise, again on average, to now 15% on average. It's like, whoa, now we have something that's like, it's kind of bridging that gap between diet and exercise and like bariatric surgery, which is around 30% total body weight loss over time. And so that's really kind of what changed the game for these GLP-1 receptor agonists. A lot of us knew that Ozempic off-label worked pretty well, but like we didn't have these higher doses. And so that's really what got me into these medicines because and it wasn't just the data, is what the patients say when they start taking these medicines. What they describe is different than what they even when with bariatric surgery. It's different than when they took phentermine. There's a level of satiety and really thoughts about food that's they describe feeling finally what people that don't struggle with their weight must feel like when it comes to food. That's kind of the big thing.
This episode was brought to you by Genova Connect. If you're serious about improving your metabolic health, probably know that having the right information is really going to be key to doing that. Without it, you're kind of just like shooting in the dark about your health. And that's where Genova Connect really comes in because they make it really easy to take control of your health with a vast range of advanced tests. And some of these tests are unlike anything I'd ever seen before. And I've been using them myself. And I was really impressed when I first stumbled upon this company, some of the readouts and information they give back to you after you complete the test. So whether, it's a metabolic panel, whether it's a hormone check, they have a gut analysis check, their tests are designed to give you really a complete picture about what's going on inside your body. And what's great is that these tests, they send them to your home. So you can do them at home on your own terms. Genova Connect sends you the kit and you just send them the sample back and they take care of the analysis. So people reach out to me all the time, every week, actually wanting more information about a detailed analysis of their biomarkers. And that could be saliva, urine, or blood. The samples. And they, a lot of people just maybe not having a chronic illness, but they want to improve their overall metabolic health. So there's lots of tests out there to do this. Genova has impressed me the most. So I personally use them and I recommend them to friends and others. So right now, Genova Connect is offering 15% off any test when you use the code Metabolic Link at gdx.net/metabolic link. So check it out and start taking care of your health and taking your health to the next level. Now back to our episode. And it does need to be coupled, obviously, with they cause a caloric deficit. So
Yes, that's right.
So these drugs, important to acknowledge that they do not really work to our understanding. Maybe you just posted something today,
Yeah.
I think, about perhaps working through a caloric independent. Was that preclinical data? Like, what are
Yes.
your thoughts on that? Because there's some discussion around that too.
Yeah, so the idea, so people think that these things are fat burners, like that you're just gonna, you don't have to lower your calorie intake, they're just gonna melt fat off your body. And we all know you need some sort of calorie deficit to reduce your body mass of some sort. So we already knew it affected appetite, but they thought, people thought like, oh, is it like increasing metabolic rate of some sort? Is it somehow doing that? And essentially what it comes down to is that it seems to be just reducing caloric intake. There is a newer drug that isn't approved yet called retatrutide. It hits not only GLP-1, but it also hits GIP, which is another similar type of hormone, but it also hits glucagon receptors. And the glucagon receptors,
Agonist, yeah.
maybe they think that that will actually increase the metabolic rate. And so then all of a sudden, that's why we're seeing people are actually melting the fat off. I have a few patients that were in the clinical trials, and what they're telling me their stories and showing me their numbers, and I'm just like, man, I think people are going to turn into skeletons if this gets approved. I just worry about like cardiovascular like effects from that retatrutide because I don't know what it would be with this glucagon agonism, but
Do they take it? Do they take it like with phentermine too? Like, is that a stack that people do, or
So, okay, so I can go over some patient case. So, tirzepatide, I will say, is the newest version. It's a GLP-1 slash GIP, glucose dependent insulinotropic polypeptide. It's such a mouthful, but um, that one results in around over 20% total body weight loss over like 70 or so months. So, think about Wegovy, 15%. Think about tirzepatide or so semaglutide, Wegovy, Zepbound, tirzepatide, over 20%, maybe 22% over even longer, maybe a little bit more. So now we're like looking at like, three times as much as like diet and exercise alone. However, not everybody responds. And or they don't respond as well. We call them kind of hypo responders, or they respond enough, but they just have so much body fat and body weight that clinically you need to get them to lose even more weight. At that point, I do stack on things like phentermine, Qsymia, bupropion. There's a bunch of other medicines, depending on the person. We don't like to just prescribe these drugs just for like purely vanity purposes. You want to be like you want to give a clinical benefit that's beyond just straight up vanity. Now, I always patients get, well, I want to lose weight for vanity purposes. I'm like, that's fine, but from my indication standpoint, I can't just give it to you for vanity purposes. I have to look and make sure you have a clinical indication, if that makes sense.
Do you approach it like a behavioral tool? So one of the projects that I was working on is using continuous glucose monitoring to sort of titrate your carbohydrates. So you're aware of the type of carbohydrate and the amount, mostly the
Yep.
amount that you're consuming, just to this metabolic awareness. And I don't even know if it's discussed, but I think of GLP-1s, improving changing eating behavior in a way that if that pattern is adopted, then it becomes an effective behavioral tool. But, some of the studies, or maybe you can speak on this, when people come off the GLP-1s, there's that weight regain, right? And then maybe you can talk about the muscle loss too and how to mitigate some of that. Uh,
Yeah.
but I think, more progressive practitioners like you probably advocate or prescribe even like exercise and maybe a higher protein diet and some kind of resistance training. And that's not even maybe an issue that we see in the literature. So maybe speak a
Yeah.
little bit about that.
Yeah. No, this is a great question. I saw a lot of people in the past, a few years ago saying like, oh, look, people are just going to take these medicines and keep eating donuts and cookies and whatever else. It's not my experience. Again, I think they need to do studies on this. There are being studies actually being done on this to look at like, all right, without intervening, does this actually change their dietary composition? I will say, based on my clinical experience, that I see it as basically a facilitator for behavior change. Basically, if we think of obesity and appetite dysregulation as like biological as opposed to purely habit based, clearly the habits are not where they should be, but is the is it the habits driving that biology, or is it the biology driving the habits? In most of these cases, it's the biology is such a driver that they're unable to change their habits without alleviating that biological drive. So you give them the medicine, all of a sudden it clears their mind. They're not thinking about food. Their cravings are gone and go, oh, you know what? Yeah, you know what? I always wanted to eat an apple instead of that bag of chips or whatever. The people know that broccoli's better than French fries. They all know it. Like this isn't rocket science, but instead they're going for that because it's easy, convenient, tastes good. They're driven kind of to do that. And we can say that they're lazy. We can say that they don't want it hard enough, but I think ultimately the body's just kind of driving them that way. And all of a sudden they take these medicines, it hits these receptors in their brain. They all of a sudden go, oh God, now I can do it. Now, the same thing with exercise. So, like, they're in pain, they're feeling terrible. You're like, hey, can you eat better and start moving a little bit more? They're like, I'm in pain, I feel terrible. So, you alleviate that a little bit. All of a sudden, they start going, oh God, I think I can do this. The self-efficacy and all these things, they feel like the hope and the power is there to do it. So, I agree. While they are biological tools, they facilitate behavior change in a way. Now, I don't know if it does it automatically. I'm a selection bias. I have a program called LiftRx, literally a lift program. I have strength coaches that I give to my patients. I have dietitians, and we're like, hey, I'm not going to force you to lift weights, but I strongly recommend it. Hey, like, I'm not going to force you to eat this much protein, but we strongly recommend it. And so, like, maybe in a general clinic, they get like they see the doctor every few months for 5 minutes at a time. It's not as good. I can't say because I don't know the data. It hasn't been studied yet. But in
Do
my
you-
experience, yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, yeah. I sorry to interrupt, but I was thinking like when you sort of choose the patients to use this approach, do you even before you begin talk about an off ramp? Talk about we're going to use these drugs to achieve, your ideal body weight or whatever. Then we're going to titrate the dose. And I know they come in preloaded pens and stuff and not really
Yeah.
multi-use unless it's compounded, and that's a whole nother discussion,
Yeah.
maybe maybe for another time. But do you, before you start using these drugs, just maybe their insurance, if the insurance stops, or is there some reason that they have to stop for side effects? Do you talk about like an off ramp before you
Yeah.
begin?
So when I talk to them, I go, look, these drugs are meant to be taken indefinitely, long-term, chronic use, just like blood pressure medicines, cholesterol medicine, whatever chronic use type of medicine there is. Having said that, a lot of people, I wouldn't say a lot of people, some people may prefer to come off of it eventually. Some people just don't want to take a medicine long term. However, I will say a lot of people that start it are like, I never want to stop this because it makes them feel a certain way, like they feel great on it. But sometimes it's not in their power. Insurances change all the time. So what I tell them is that like if you want to come off of it, it's meant to be taken long term. But if you want to, I'm not going to stop you. So let me help you do it in a way that I think will minimize the weight regain. So we talk about, all the same types of lifestyle factors that we know help with long-term weight loss maintenance they're exactly the same. Like, yeah, probably a little bit higher protein diet, probably a lot of physical activity, lifting weights, uh, aerobic activity too, satiating foods, like all those types of things are the same that we see with this medicine. When you look at the trials, they've done it, they put everybody on the drug and then some part way through months later, they'll re-randomize some people to a placebo. And what you see is most of those people do regain their weight. However, there is a small percentage of people that can seem to maintain that weight loss. And I was just having a discussion about this, and we don't know what it is about those people. Is it because they didn't have that biological dysregulated appetite, and so they're like, whatever, I can stay off this drug. I'm not really sure, but I do help if people want to try to come off of it. I try to help them.
I was thinking it just might change their relationship with food and they just associate this particular eating pattern. But then I guess does the current prescriptive tools allow you to microdose? Do they come in forms where you can microdose it, or spreading
Yeah.
out the dosage pattern, but are the pharmaceutical companies going to make these available in multi-use vials where
I,
people can do that? Has that happened yet?
so Lilly Direct has their single-use vials. I'm not going to say I do this, but a lot of doctors are just like, whatever, just use it like multi-use vials. The thing is, there are some bactericidal properties about multi-use vials that are different from the single-use vials, but I haven't heard anything if people are having any issues with that. I'm very careful because I'm like scared of getting sued, but I know other doctors do that. In other countries,
So
they
it's a
actually
safety thing. So you would get sued because it's a safety thing?
just in case. So if they're a single-use vial,
Yeah,
they're supposed to be made for one, you put
yeah.
the syringe in and you pull it out. You're not meant to keep putting the syringe. And I don't know, I'm not an expert in single versus multi-use vials. I've tried to look it up and understand it, and other
Yeah.
people are like, nah, it's not that big of a risk. I'm not really sure. I will say that other countries though have multi-use pens, and
Oh,
this goes down another rabbit hole of big pharma greed. Let's just be honest. But why? Like some patients need doses in between the incremental changes between. So, for example, Wegovy goes from semaglutide 0.25 milligrams to zero point 0.5 milligrams to 1 milligram to 1.7 to 2.4. Sometimes that jump from zero point 0.5 to 1 or from the 1 to the 1.7 or even the 1.7 to the 2.4 is too much for that person. Why can't I click in between? And you can do this with other types of pens. I should be able to click in between and do different doses. You can't do it though. They in the United States, their pens are designed, and I swear it's because it's a. I mean, we know it's got to be some corporate greed thing where they don't want people splitting their pens and taking a high dose and just maximizing the long-term use of it. Because imagine if you only needed a little dose, you could get the maximum one and just use a little dose at a time. That's got to be the reason why. There's no other explanation. So shame on them if they're listening. You guys are jerks.
Yeah, and it's so much more expensive here too. I mean, we spend so much
Yeah.
on advertising. I guess that's a big bulk.
Yeah. They don't
Reason.
even need to advertise. These drugs are selling themselves. They're coming off the
Yeah.
shelf. I hate it when I see the commercials because I'm like, you don't need to do this. Everybody on TikTok's already talking about it. You're just wasting money that could be going towards lowering the price of the drug. Anyway, that's a whole nother thing. But yes, ideally, they would just make it affordable enough and you would have multi-use files. You could do in between doses. And then, like you said, I have patients that they 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 get down and they try to come off. They can't come off completely, but they can be on a small dose and spread it out instead of every 7 days. It's every 10 to 14 days, and that keeps them at bay. But when you're using the single-use vials, you have to, if you're using a lower than the 2.5 milligram dose and that Zepbound tirzepatide, then you're either taking the risk of contaminating and having maybe an infection. I don't know what the risks are of using a single-use vial multiple times, or you got to waste some of it, and that's just not good either.
Essential fatty acids are crucial for brain function, hormone production, and also immune regulation, things like skin health, and also probably cardiovascular health is the most important. The essential fatty acid C15 is really the first essential fatty acid to even be discovered in the last 90 years. So low levels of C15 can wreak havoc on your metabolic health. Higher levels of this fatty acid have been shown conclusively to be associated with health biomarkers and health benefits. And this was discussed in detail in previous podcasts. Most of us are actually pretty deficient in C15, and this can decrease our energy levels and our resilience. Fatty 15 is a science-backed, award-winning pure C15 supplement. And if you're not eating copious amounts of high animal-based diet, or if you're more plant-based diet, you are likely deficient in C15, this essential fatty acid. So not surprisingly, others have told me that they've tested and their C15 levels are low and they can bring it up to optimal range with fatty 15. So you can get an additional 15% off their 90-day subscription starter kit by going to fatty15.com/metabolic link and using the code metabolic link, all one word, at checkout. Now back to our episode with Dr. Nadolsky. Yeah, so do you check and monitor blood levels of GLP-1? Like I measured myself. I think I'm like 7 or 8 or something. It was like years ago, but is this something like that? I guess stated another way, do people that respond to these drugs have a GLP-1 deficiency in producing it, or are they perhaps in GLP-1 insensitivity? So is there a discussion about this?
Yeah, so this I've had discussions with some of the top researchers in this, and it looks like mixed in general, but likely people with obesity don't have a deficiency in GLP-1. People with type 2 diabetes develop this kind of loss of that incretin effect. So that, have you talked about the incretin effect real quick? But the gist is, back in whatever it was, 50s, 60s, I always screw up the
I
date.
teach about it and everything, and
Okay.
it to the med students, but it's very superficial, to be honest. And I
Yeah,
think,
it was super cool though. They injected glucose into the veins, and then they had other people drink glucose.
yeah. Mhm.
And to me, you'd think, and they wanted to look at the response of insulin, and you would think that if somebody injected glucose straight into the veins, it goes straight to the pancreas. You'd think that it would be a bigger response of insulin being released. And they found that people drinking the glucose, there was a bigger area under the curve of insulin. So, and they didn't, they called it the incretin effect. I was told that it was the intestinal secretion of insulin, incretin. Although I'm reading this book by one of the kind of discoverers, and he didn't mention that, so I'm like, did I just make that up? I don't know. Incretin. I thought it was intestinal secretion of insulin. I thought that's why they called it. Anyway, the incretin effect is very cool, but in type 2 diabetes, some of that effect is lost. So that's why it's like, oh yeah, give them back this medicine. Now the thing is, with your own endogenous GLP-1, it's broken down so quickly, and it doesn't even get to the parts of the brain where it needs to go to even have those effects for the satiety and all that. So these receptor agonists have such a long half-life, and they hit the receptors in different ways that are different than our own human GLP-1. So if we measured our own GLP-1, like it wouldn't even really matter, so to speak, because these things are just they're just so much more potent and last so much longer, and we can get much higher levels in our body from them. I do think there's a utility, though. There's thought that people that don't respond as well to the medicines, it's because not enough's getting into their system. So when they do some of these kind of like bench research studies, they show that, hey, the people that get more, serum levels of whatever it is, semaglutide, tirzepatide, those are the ones that are having the strongest weight loss and effect. And the people that don't get it as much, maybe they're not absorbing as much. So that might be a clinical utility, but like I think that'd be pretty hard. They'd have to create some assays to detect that specific receptor agonist. So semaglutide, tirzepatide, and then when all these other new ones come out, they'd have to make assays for that. So whether there's insensitivities, I actually think there might be like resistance of some sort. I have a feeling genetically there's got to be, because I have this patient phenotype that's just like they don't respond as well to it. And I'm like looking at them going like, we cranked this dose up and you lost like 5 to 10% of your weight and like you just don't feel it. And maybe there's not enough getting into their system, or maybe there's some resistance. I think there's a genetic component there. I'm sure Big Pharma is trying to study that to get around it, but clinically, that's what I believe.
Do lean people secrete more GLP-1 in response to a meal? And are there GLP-1 secretagogues like allulose? There's
Yeah.
protein, or just or yerba mate coffee, I think. Maybe there's things that will increase, GLP-1. Is that stuff
Yeah. So
that can be leveraged? And are drugs being designed to increase GLP-1 secretion?
Yeah, so they tried to look at the differences between those with obesity and those that are lean without obesity, and look at GLP-1s. Some suggested maybe there's a decrease in those with obesity, but then other studies have showed, nah, not really much of a difference. In terms of foods and supplements that might increase it. Now, the issue is even if you increase your own endogenous levels, it's broken down so quickly to where it doesn't have that effect. Glycemic wise, though, so there is a medicine called DPP4 inhibitors. So if anybody's heard of sitagliptin, Januvia is the brand that came out around the same time as Byetta, right when I was in med school. And that one has, it's a decent, it doesn't really help with weight loss though. It increases your own GLP-1 because your own GLP-1 doesn't break down. So it goes up by like 2 or 3 times than your current GLP-1, but than your current GLP-1 levels. But people don't lose weight, but they do have a good blood sugar effect. So something like an allulose or some of these other some probiotics that people are looking at that may increase GLP-1 levels. I always tell them like don't assume you're going to lose much weight with it, but there could be a glycemic benefit.
Well, there's an animal study in Nature Communications that when they gavaged mice with a dose, it would be like a pretty whopping dose for me to take, but GLP-1 went up in a rodent model like 500%. And
500. Well, maybe that would
that,
have an effect.
that the human, I think from humans, I've seen 30%, 40%,
Yeah,
with allulose. So
I
that's,
wouldn't expect that to be huge in terms of weight loss, but maybe glycemic benefit. I'm sure there's some other glycemic. Obviously, if you're replacing sugar and other calorie foods with allulose, I assume that would also be beneficial for weight, right?
yeah. Does GLP-1, so this is a question that gets bounced around and debated too. Does it decrease or increase insulin? So insulin is like a driver for
Yeah,
fat accumulation, right? But long term, right? Like, so maybe talk
yeah,
about the acute effects versus, because there's debate and
yeah. So I've
debate
seen the
about.
debates. It's actually it's kind of funny because like the people like, well, see these GLP-1 agonists, they increase insulin and people are losing weight, so that kills the carbohydrate insulin hypothesis. Acutely postprandially we see increases in glucose or insulin. However, long term you're losing weight, like your overall insulin levels are coming down. So I mean, like, it's one of these zingers. I love seeing the debates. It's so funny. People get so mad. But like that is, I think it's important to know that like, well, with the carbohydrate insulin hypothesis, uh, hypothesize that it's the postprandial insulin levels. So over time, that it just the area under the curve insulin starts going down regardless because people are losing weight. I always just focus on like, look, forget about the insulin and all these types of things. Like these drugs are reducing appetite. People are eating fewer calories and they're losing a lot of weight. Whether it disproves any insulin hypothesis, I don't know. I don't really, you know, that's my thought about it, kind of like more practically.
When was the last time you needed to go to the doctor, but you pushed it off? You made excuses. I'm too busy. You get an injury, it's going to heal on its own. So I've done this for sure. So I think we've all been there. Booking a doctor's appointment can just kind of feel daunting when you have so many tasks at hand. ZocDoc makes it super easy for you to book a doctor who's right for you. So ZocDoc is free. It's a free app and a website where you can search and compare high quality in-network doctors and then click on them and instantly book your appointment. So it really takes all the guesswork out. We're talking about booking in-network appointments with more than 100,000 doctors in every specialty. So I needed an eye doctor the other day, easy to find. Dermatologist the other day was easy to find. So there's also doctors that focus on mental health, on dental health, primary care, urgent care, and more. So you can filter out the doctors, you take your insurance, you can look at doctors that are, nearby, 10-mile radius, for example, that are a good fit for, your medical needs. And of course, they have a rating system. So you can pick like the most highly rated doctors, that's rated by verified patients who have been treated by the doctors. So it's really an amazing platform. So once you find the right doctor, you can see their actual appointment openings, and then you can just choose a time slot that works for you. And then you click on it, and then you instantly book a visit that way. It's like so much easier than kind of any other process I've been through. So when you book an appointment, you can usually do it in like 24 to 48 hours. After booking, you can see the doctor. You can even, in many cases, in my case, I was able to see the doctor at the same day. So this is the product I'm now using, and you should be using it too because it just makes this whole process so much easier. So stop putting off those doctor's appointments and go to ZocDoc.com/metabolic link to find a doctor and instantly book a top rated doctor for your appointment today. That's ZocDoc, that's spelled ZocDoc.com/metabolic link. So ZocDoc.com/metabolic link. Now back to our episode. You're just focused on the outcomes. Well, a little bit more of a mechanistic question, not to delve too, but do these things cross the blood-brain barrier? And we know they impact behavior. And I want to talk a little bit about the side effects on that. But, as a neuroscientist, I'm very interested in reward signaling, maybe does it attenuate hedonic behavior? Will our desires and our passion for other things, whether it be, our activities we like to do and things like that, will that be reduced? Is it decreasing like the dopaminergic response, for example, to things that we enjoy? And that seems to be talked about a lot too.
Yes. So regarding the blood-brain barrier, there are certain receptors right outside in the brainstem and in these other places that it hits, and then it doesn't have those downstream effects that then affect deeper in the brain. I kind of followed some of these researchers that are, they are literally neurobiologists that are looking at these receptors. And I can't make I'm not actually sure because I've seen them debate it back and forth at some of these conferences. What I will say that some of the newer ones, it's thought that some of these newer ones may cross, and that's why maybe there's more of effect, especially because human GLP-1 just gets broken down so quickly. It doesn't even have time to hit those receptors. So that might be one of the thoughts. But either way, even if it's hitting outside, there's downstream effects. That is part of the mechanism. Regarding the hedonic, I think this actually plays a big role of why they work so well. Whereas like the phentermine and the gastric bypasses, they don't have that similar effect. What people describe is different than when they take those other medicines or to get surgery. And so like those thoughts about food, but also like I had a few viral, sounds funny, viral TikTok videos just because all I said was like, hey, some of my patients are describing XYZ. So alcohol cessation, like they don't feel like drinking alcohol. They don't feel like gambling anymore. They don't feel like shopping addiction. Now they shop more because sometimes they have to get smaller clothes, but like they're not just doom scrolling on XYZ anymore or going on Amazon and just doing weird things and buying all sorts of stuff or biting their nails. So there is like, and it does seem that there's an effect there. And I think the newer drugs that hit the receptors even differently or may cross the blood-brain barrier in different ways because they're smaller. These peptides are big, by the way. So I think we're going to see all sorts of studies coming out of that. But clinically, I see it all the time. Now, the worry, though, is that it dampens it so much that people don't enjoy life. So here's
Yeah.
a few examples. Now, most people don't. They're like, no, I still love everything. I had some patients describe they loved cooking before. It was like their thing. Now they had obesity, and now they don't. And now they're into exercise, but they're like, I do miss like cooking, but I don't feel like doing it anymore. And they can't describe why, other than it must be the drug dampened down whatever that I don't
Well,
want to call it an
it's
addiction, but
also a relationship with food, with
yeah,
cooking, but I'm thinking
yeah,
like, I don't know. I like motorcycles. I like, like different things will just sort of kick a dopamine response when I think about
yeah,
doing them, right? And I just wonder, worry, maybe even about the attenuation of the things that because they're major drivers of enjoyment of life, right?
yeah.
So does it have a crossover effect or
I
off-target effect, if you want to call it that?
I once in a while, so like I monitor it very closely because like you don't mess around with mood.
Mhm.
Like that's such a strong part of our lives and quality of life. So like I monitor it closely. There was worry that maybe there was an increase in suicide, in
I
thoughts of
wanted to ask
suicide.
about that. I mean, there was a study, this is like 192% or something like that, and that was on my list of things to sort of discuss about that. Yeah.
So they went deep into it in Europe over here, and it looked like because and why would it be an effect in those with obesity taking these medicines as opposed to just type 2 diabetes using it? Anyway, they looked closely. It doesn't seem to be a strong effect. I will say though, once in a while, you'll see that like I am feeling down, and it has to be the medicine. You take them off, they feel good. It happens once in a while. I started this company called Sequence. It got bought by Weight Watchers, and we were doing some of the trial or studies looking at people. And I was looking over. We were doing studies on like the effect on mood because I was so interested when that came out a couple of years ago about this potential. And I was going through. We had like whatever it was, 40,000 patients at the time, and I was going through their different spreadsheets of like, and one person out of 40,000, they had to stop because they were starting to get suicidal ideation. So it's rare, but it's not out of the realm. I just had a patient. I just posted about it just now that they got cranked up to the 15 milligrams of Zepbound, which is tirzepatide, and they just
15. Okay. Wow.
they weren't losing weight, and they were on 10, and they just kept cranking them up, whoever, the past provider. And then they came to me and they're like, I don't know, I'm just not losing weight. I kind of just feel down. I don't feel like working out anymore. And I was like, why don't we do this? Why don't we take you down to 10 milligrams of Zepbound, which actually 10, when you compare the 10 and 15 milligrams, they're actually very similar in amounts of weight loss. So like if somebody's, I'd be surprised if somebody lost a lot more weight on those higher doses compared to the 10. But she had been on bupropion years ago, so I actually started on a little bit of bupropion, and I just saw her. It was just such a cool case. She didn't lose weight for months. In the past 3 months, she's lost 10 pounds, and she's like, I feel great. I'm back in the gym doing all the things. And so like you monitor, just whoever's listening, monitor mood. Like it's rare, but you do see kind of this anhedonia, like, I don't care about, doing whatever. And that's not good because we want people to be physically active.
Yeah.
Going to the muscle loss thing, do you know Grant Tinsley, Dr. Tinsley?
Yeah.
He's
Sure. Mhm.
So he's my chief science officer. We're actually we're going to publish a case series because the worry is Peter Tia went on what Megan Kelly was like, my patient lost 2/3 of the weight was from muscle, and it was like, wait, what? I've never seen that. So we actually have I because I promote lifting weights and protein. We had some patients who had we didn't do a formal study. We had they just happened to get a DEXA before and after, and these people actually like looked like they gained muscle, at least a few of them. Very minimal fat-free mass loss, and you gotta differentiate between fat-free mass and muscle. I'm sure you've
Yeah,
spoken
yeah.
about. You should have him on and talk all about it because I'm not a DEXA expert. But what I am seeing is that very minimal amounts of fat-free mass or lean soft tissue loss with these medicines if they are doing what we should do, which is lifting some weights and eating. Yeah, I tend to recommend about 1.2 grams per kilogram of weight. So like if you're 220 pounds, it's only 120 grams. It's not much. It's not much. Ideally, you'd get more if you can, but like honestly, the
Yeah.
people are sick of trying to eat too much protein, but we don't see it. Now, I will say they just came out with the tirzepatide data and showed around 25% fat-free mass loss on average, and those people weren't lifting weights. And that's about what we'd expect. So I'm not worried about the fat-free mass loss, but I will say like where I do worry are people that shouldn't be taking the medicine. They're already kind of like relatively lean, and it ends up being kind of like yo-yo dieting where you crash diet, go hard, you
Mhm.
stop doing that, you regain your weight, and you just keep doing this cycle. And then slowly but surely, the worry is that you're worsening body composition. You're losing muscle and fat, and then if you
Yeah.
gain weight rapidly, is it more of that weight
Absolutely.
regain, more fat versus
Yeah.
the muscle regain? So
And
that's what I worry about.
there's no adipose hy hyperplasia was
Yeah.
just a little bit, and that's mostly a non-issue, you think? I mean, if someone rapidly gains weight back, I guess if the adipocytes, swell up and hypertrophy, then they divide,
Yeah.
just kind of like muscles. But that's not you don't think that's a valid concern, I guess.
No, so that was, I saw a few people making this kind. Liraglutide in mouse in a few animal studies, liraglutide, mind you, again, that was the older drug, showed there's a potential for pre-adipocyte differentiation, which, like potentially that's a good thing, honestly, because
Healthy adipocytes then, right? Like
yeah,
maybe.
we want healthy subcutaneous adipocytes. We don't want adipocytes developing around our pancreas, around our heart, in places that the adipocytes aren't supposed to be. But regardless, even if there's a small effect, so we look at, do you know like the PPAR gamma?
Yeah. Mhm.
So like the one that there's Vandia, okay, uh, rosiglitazone, the glitazones, they got, one of them got taken off the market, but pioglitazone is still around. But that's how they work. And they have a small amount of weight gain properties. But honestly, these drugs work by decreasing people's energy intakes. And like, if there is a small little bit of this effect, it's minuscule in terms of the effect of the appetite. So like, if you use them and there's a small bit of increase in number of adipocytes, and then you stop the medicine, most of that weight regain, it's not going to be from the extra adipocytes. It's going to be from the appetite dysregulation coming back and you eating more. That's the gist.
When you prescribe exercise to your patients, just presumably their obesity, most patients have obesity. Like, what percentage of those patients actually engage in and sustain that? Like, what's your dropout rate, I guess?
Yeah. So if so I would say the people that start, I would say maybe around 50%. And that's, that might sound low, but like I think when you look on average, and then people just don't lift. So if I'm always asking about it. So like even like 3 month follow, I'm like, hey, how are things going? Yeah, I'm losing weight. I'm like, have you considered, I'm always here. I don't like, you got to be careful not to push them because like they view exercise as like punishment. So I'm always like, I'm here. We got a program. We got strength coaches. If you, do you, any interest in that type of thing? Kind of like, And then even later though, they start going, yeah, I feel like I'm ready to get into it. So it could be higher than 50%. I'm just spitballing 50% because I'm just trying to think of people that don't versus do. I have a lot of people that follow me that are into it. So I'm like, I'm a little bit of a selection bias, but most of them sustain it though. I very few stop. There are some patients that are like, yeah, I don't really like lifting, but I like swimming. I used to swim a lot, and can I get into that? I'm like, yeah, just like if you want to do, I would still lift if you can, just for the medicinal properties of bone mass and bone mineral density and muscle mass. But like, you're gonna do what you enjoy doing. So if you don't enjoy doing it, like just focus on the things you enjoy. But like if you can still keep lifting weights. So that's kind of how I approach it.
Mhm. Yeah, I think that's really key. So there's no good studies, maybe you're working on them, of people taking these drugs, lifting, and then people not lifting or choosing to
So
usually
we
not.
have a lot. We have a cohort we're recruiting for right now, about 100 people. We're doing DEXAs before, during, and like way later in their journey with hand grip strength. Ideally, we're going to do like I want to do randomized trials. I want to do a randomized trial, but I've like it's hard when we're decentralized. I am actually working on a randomized trial with a few groups, but
Mhm.
and we're going to see because there are a few people that are joining that aren't exercising, and then we have other people that are lifting. I'm hoping that we're able to be powered enough to see differences. We can compare the groups like, hey, like what happened here? But you need a randomized trial but like this will be a good start to at least go, hey, look, this group lifted, this group didn't. Here's what happened. Um, so I think I'm kind of excited to see what happens there because my guess is that I think you can really minimize that fat-free mass loss. Like I see it, but I can't like definitively say it because I do think we need a randomized trial to do that, but it's cool to see at least clinically.
Yeah, I think that's huge. It's going to be huge. Cognizant of the time here, but I have like at least two more questions.
Yeah.
Kids. So I think these
Yeah.
drugs are approved for what, like 12 years,
Yeah.
and are
For Wegovy, not tirzepatide yet, but yeah.
Gobi. Okay. So what do you, I mean, we have a huge problem with, childhood obesity,
Yeah.
and for a wide variety of reasons, partially the food system, maybe, and just
Yeah.
like eating culture, eating behavior.
Yeah.
What are your thoughts on kids using these drugs or
Yeah,
kids?
kids, doctors are careful. I see all the, RFK and all these other people on the media outlets saying, "Oh, we're gonna give these drugs to kids instead of putting lifestyle." It's like I can tell you, I speak to obesity pediatric specialists, and they're not readily prescribing these drugs because you like yes, we have some data. It's not super long term. We don't know what happens long term. There's growth and all sorts of things that are going on in that very special time. Having said that, though, when you have a kid that has, you know, fatty liver disease, dysfunction, and type 2 diabetes, when it's like this is something you used to see when the people are like 60 years old, and now you're seeing it in an 8-year-old, and there is no stopping this progression, you know,
Yeah.
that's where it's used, especially when the what they do in pediatric obesity centers. They work their best. They work with the family. It's really difficult. God bless their souls because like it's very difficult to work in that population. It's a whole different ball game. But I think it's fine to use it in the right patient. I will say I haven't done it yet. I get a lot of requests to do it, but I think it requires a very multidisciplinary, comprehensive approach before jumping that gun. That's my thoughts.
Well, that was sort of like the segue into my last question, really, is that your thoughts on these drugs for off-label use for prevention, right? I
Yeah,
mean, I don't know. I'm 50 and like, maybe 50% of people over 50 are like obese or like
yeah,
overweight or obese. So, just, normalizing type 2 diabetes, obesity related cancers. I just give a talk
yeah,
on that. And there's like, obstructive sleep apnea, blood pressure, Alzheimer's disease, Parkinson's disease. I know some papers that came out. I didn't get a chance to read them, but they look pretty compelling, at least the bottom line. So, what are your thoughts about well, there's a disparity issue with cost and everything, and that's maybe
yeah,
something that has to be dealt with.
yeah,
But just simply the practical application of these drugs for prevention. I mean,
yeah,
that's going to be a huge lever. If we, and that's why I kind of, with childhood obesity, if we can correct that, then that person with non-alcoholic fatty liver disease is not going to need a liver transplant, at like
Yeah.
your 30. Your thoughts on that?
Here's my prediction. I can't say this will happen exactly, but right now I don't recommend it for prevention because it hasn't been studied. Having said that, you can imagine a world where you can predict who is going to develop obesity and obesity-related comorbidities and downstream effects, sequela from the obesity. So imagine someone, they're in their, whatever, late teens, early 20s, mid 20s, whatever, early 30s, and they're starting to gain weight. And you can start seeing signs of, subclinical, like metabolic syndrome-esque, subclinical though. Like it's like, well, they're looking to teeter that way. Their triglycerides went from 70 to now they're 100. They've got abdominal obesity brewing, and their BMI is not yet at a level that is approved. So for BMI is usually 30 and or 27, but like they're getting away from BMI anyway. But let's say we see that person and on the street you might look at them and go, they don't have obesity, but that person is going to develop it, and you could predict they're probably gonna have heart attacks and strokes and all sorts of stuff later. Family history, you can look at certain precision genetics if you want to. That person, why don't we just give them a little low dose of this stuff and prevent the weight gain? So they're studying it. Big pharma is going to try to get these drugs and everybody. And the argument's like, why don't we just change the environment? We should absolutely change the environment. Let's change it. Let's prevent it in the first place. But I do think that we need a tool to help those who are struggling currently. Even if we change the environment, again, I don't think we're ever going to go back a century and get back to what we were before. It's just not going to happen. We're in a new world. So, but like we need to treat the people that have the obesity now, but to prevent it, we need to change the environment. But I do think targeting and being kind of precision medicine aspect and giving people even just a low dose might be beneficial. They need to study it though. We need to make sure there's the benefits outweigh the risks.
That the safety's there.
Yeah.
Proactive approach.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, awesome. Spencer, I want to thank you for your time. I know you have patients to see. It's 1 o'clock. And I want to thank you for taking this deep dive. I think we've hit on so many topics, and so excited to sort of bring this to our listeners because we haven't delved into this topic.
Perfect.
And you are the person to do it. And you did.
Thanks for having me on. Thank you so much.
Maybe we can do another deep dive into lipidology too.
Yeah, let's do it. Some fun stuff.
Passionate topic there. Well, thank you again, Spencer, and we appreciate it. And look forward to the live Q&A we're going to do too, after this gets aired. So I'm sure patients will have, or people will have a lot of questions.
Perfect. I'm down for it.
Appreciate your time, Spencer. Thank you. Thanks for watching and listening to this episode of the Metabolic Link. If you like this episode, please review it. Leave us a review on whichever major platform player you're using to tune in. You can also subscribe to our YouTube channel and watch the full video versions of these episodes. And don't forget to leave us a comment. That really helps the algorithm. We also upload private episodes to the Metabolic Link that are completely ad-free to our medical education platform. So if you don't like the ads, you can join on that platform. So the Metabolic Initiative, on this metabolic platform, the Metabolic Initiative, Dr. Nadolsky will be joining us for a live Q&A on April 22nd. So this is free to join. So on April 22nd, that'll be 9 a.m. Pacific time, 12 noon Eastern time. And he'll be there to answer all your questions as a follow-up to this episode. So to get there, go to membership.metabolicinitiative.com/Dr. Spencer to sign up for free. And thank you again for tuning in, and I hope to see you next time.
Do you love learning about metabolic health? So do we. It's why we created the Metabolic Initiative, an online educational platform providing evidence-based education on metabolic health and therapies for healthcare professionals and the general public. By joining the Metabolic Initiative, you'll gain access to hundreds of expert lectures, interviews, panel discussions, and even private episodes of the Metabolic Link. CMEs are available. Go to metabolicinitiative.com to get started. And as always, Thank you for listening to the Metabolic Link.